I'm Dr. Jay Anders, and this is Tell Me Where It Hurts, where we discuss some of the big challenges in health IT and how we can solve them so clinicians can do what they do best, care for patients. I'm here at HIMSS26 for Tell Me Where It Hurts podcast, and I'm with Santina Allen, who's the group president of HIMSS Healthcare. Santina, we've talked a while in the past, and you've been around a lot, and you've been at a lot of these meetings. Do you see anything? What do you see different between, like, say, last year's HIMSS and this year's HIMSS?
So last year it felt like AI everywhere you turned, but on the surface. Mm-hmm. I actually think the maturity level is getting there with businesses that, like yourself, like now helping the businesses realize value out of embedding technologies that, again, were foreign to them, large database structures, just repositories of data, where it's all coming together, but then actually finding ways to create value out of that. Not just big EHRs or small EHRs or ambulatory, but even rev cycle and remote care management companies.
Yeah, it seems to me I've seen this shift from AI everywhere and let's see what sticks on a wall to let's determine what we want it to do, and actually can we get it to do that, and actually assist the folks who have to deliver care, do revenue cycle, do all the things in medicine that most clinicians don't want to even think about, and get that off their plate. And I've looked around and I don't see AI everywhere like I used to, but AI is here, of course. But so I think you're right. I think we're getting to that point where let's actually evaluate what these things will do and try to get them to do that. There's all this back and forth now with Anthropic and OpenAI and all the government doing whatever. So how's HIMSS fitting into all of that?
Yeah, I think all of our businesses, they run semi-autonomously. You might be aware of that, and each one has the ability to take what we're sharing as best practices, across the healthcare group, and apply that where it makes sense to their business. A great example, one we may have talked about in the past, but a group working to create something completely new up in Quebec. Mm-hmm. That process, working hand in hand, being side by side with the clinicians, has been really a game changer. And I think that's when I think about my roots in healthcare IT. There have been pockets of businesses that I've worked with in the past do that really well, and then they're propelled out of that process. So I think that's sort of the key, that when I think about what HIMSS businesses need to do right now, it's stay really close to those customers, really close to those clinicians, and help propel both the customer and the business forward.
That is so refreshing to hear too, because for the longest time, one of my soapboxes is why don't these companies ask the people who actually have to use this kind of software what they want, need, or what their workflows are, or how can we help you do your stuff, whatever it is. Yeah. And that seems to finally taken hold. And I'm very pleased with that, because for the longest time, that didn't happen. We had especially clinicians out there with products that they absolutely hate, and would give up in a nanosecond. Yep. And I'm starting to see now, okay, there are things we can add on to some of these to make that a whole lot better. Yeah. So, looking around this hall, what do you think is probably the most convergent theme you see here?
I don't know that I've spent an awful lot of time looking up with my businesses, so I think that I might not be able to answer that.
Is there anything that's impressed you that you've actually walked by and looked at? It's okay to say no.
To be honest, I've been the guys did a really good job of setting me up with appointments.
Okay.
So it's been sort of surgical.
Okay.
They got a lot of time to sort of walk the corridor here before the show opened with everyone. I actually am surprised it seems smaller than
Interesting. I
There's
see,
a lot of empty space.
and but I think the energy is a little better than it was a couple of years ago. I think people are more engaged, which is good because we can't.
Maybe it's the attendees that are here are the real ones that get value from being here. That may be the difference, where it's not just send the masses for whatever reason, but we're here for a purpose, and I think that's really important for everyone that we send, to make sure that they understand their purpose, what value they're getting from being here, and what value they add to the mix here.
Well, Santina, thank you so much for stopping by, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for your time.
Welcome to the HIMSS edition of Tell Me Where It Hurts. I'm here with Jeane Armstrong, the Chief Medical Officer of Touchworks and Altera. Jeane, tell me a little bit about what you're seeing this year here at HIMSS.
Well, it's pretty exciting. Obviously, AI is everywhere, as we all sort of expected. But I think what's a little more fun is that it's starting to be some AI that's practical, that has some workflows associated with it. Instead of this magical panacea, it's like, really, how can it make a difference in the industry? So that's exciting.
So when you've been to HIMSS a long time, as I have, do you see things differently this year, energy-wise, what you're seeing being presented?
That's a great question. Because I have been doing this a long time, one of the things I enjoy most is seeing all the people I've worked at different hospitals, different companies over the time, and what they're doing and what they're taking off. And I do think there's a different energy this year. They've reorganized. They have a lot more networking things built in. We all networked here before, but they finally are acknowledging it and having like the park and the places where you can make it easier to meet up.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I've noticed is along the AI line we were just talking about, you're right. I think it's converted from this throw AI at everything all the time and see what happens to let's determine what we want it to do. And will it really work? And all the governance and transparency and all of that starting to come into this. Tell me a little bit what your thoughts are on that.
You're absolutely right. You're starting to see it. It's interesting because you and I, as you said, have been doing this a little while. We've done some joint projects where we've called this out for the last couple of years, right? Just taking, for example, unstructured text and putting it in here, or claims and do this. That's not the power. It has to be in a real workflow. It has to have cybersecurity around it. It has to have governance, right? You and I have talked a lot about governance. And so you're starting to see that. I don't think you're seeing it as much as you and I would like to see it, but we're actually starting to see it.
No, I absolutely agree about that. It's interesting that I just read an article recently that said, for interoperability, you'll love this. Basically, we don't need standards, we just apply an LLM to it. I was flabbergasted about that. I just want interoperability to work. And I'm not talking about big time, just send my records across the street and make them useful. So when you think about interoperability, real data, and all of that, we're about to enter this new era where patients are going to ping their QHINs to get their medical records. You and I both know that those medical records are going to contain errors. So give me your thoughts on how that's going to be an impact, especially for the clinicians. Because who are you going to ask when you find something in your medical record that you know is wrong or you don't understand?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great observation as always. I don't know. Honestly, I think of a couple things, and this is really old school. I remember teaching medical assistants how to use EHRs and how to input clinical data. And so this is back when people filled out forms, with a pen. They'd fill out the form, and a patient would come in, and they'd say they had anemia. They said, so there's a checkbox, right? There's all those checkboxes, like, do you have anemia? Do you have this? The person checked anemia. The MA put it into the record, and we had a workflow where the provider might want to review some of those things before they put it in for obvious reasons. And the obvious reason is when I ask the patient about their anemia, She was 80 years old, and she said with her second baby, they told her she was anemic. I said, has anyone ever mentioned that since then? Have you ever been on medicine, et cetera? Nope. So obviously you and I would not have put that in the record because that anemia does not matter. That was with pregnancy, and it was literally 60 years ago at that point, right?
Yeah.
And so you start thinking about people having access to the records. And I remember the funny stories that came out of just us having open notes, like patients calling to complain that, they said I complained, and it was because the HPI said the patient complains of such and such, right?
Yep.
So the learning curve to do that, there is such a human element. The AI is certainly going to make a difference, but the people who are thinking like this, they haven't worked in offices and hospitals to understand the practicality of doing this with a general patient population, right?
Yep. So let's talk a little bit, because I have been in the EMR business. Now I'm in the medical informatics business. You've been in EMR forever. One of the things I'm seeing, which I'm really happy about, is we're starting to move from a billing code to clinical care. And I've always been a proponent of, you do the clinical care first, the coding will follow. So the problem I'm seeing is now all your medical records are being filled with these kind of weird billing codes that really don't describe, and this is going on problem lists because of ICD-10 and all of that. How are we going to clean that up? I mean, it's like is there a difference between other respiratory disorders and COPD? You darn tootin' there is. So how are we going to fix that?
That's another great question. I share that passion. I'm a clinician first. I want EHRs to work well because I have to use them. My friends have to use them. We have to care for. I'm getting the medical care. My family's getting the medical care. So I want those records to be accurate and usable. I think one of the things, and this would be a pie in the sky idea, we have to move away from our problem list being that list of billing. Because still every EHR, that is how they are all organized. You go back to Dr. Weed and we go back to the problem-oriented record, but the problems have to do something other than billing. And the good news is AI can make that possible, right?
Sure.
But I don't know that everybody's as concerned about it as you and I are. I'm glad that you're seeing it make some progress. I think, with you guys having a robust terminology that supports that, you guys are going to see it maybe before anyone else does. Maybe you see the tipping point. But from my standpoint, I want what you said, but I don't feel it quite yet. But I'd love it to be that way.
Yeah, I would too. Jeane, as always, it's been great to talk to you. We'll be talking soon. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm here at HIMSS for Tell Me Where It Hurts podcast, and I have Dr. Sari Green, who's a physician executive director of Accuity, a clinical revenue cycle performance. So, Dr. Green, what do you see new and important and fun this year here at HIMSS?
A lot of conversation around technology and AI as it is really making its way everywhere, and kind of specifically what we're looking at into the revenue cycle.
Mm-hmm. Do you see a lot of inroads in that? Because I think revenue cycle would be a great application for AI because it's not really direct patient care, which everybody gets excited about.
Yes, I think yes and. So yes, I think it is a great place for AI with the caveat that, we're still really the goal, right, is as it moves to the revenue cycle for that administrative record to be the most accurate reflection of the clinical reality. Mm-hmm. And it's still, so I really think that we need a hybrid approach. So we use AI for what it's best for, right? Identifying patterns, surfacing gaps, prioritizing, but I think it's dangerous to some degree, right? It's not going to work without that physician governance, right? Without the kind of clinical governance in that space as well. So not so much to kind of replace the clinical judgment or the, kind of the nuance, but really just to augment it and make it easier to have that translation be accurate.
Going back to my health plan administrator days, which is probably another century ago, one of the issues we had back then in looking at claims support from documentation was all those gaps. So are you seeing a better more accurate data set coming out of it now? Or are you thinking it's probably, because I'm thinking about the ambient listing. And the study just came out recently from Stanford and Harvard that 70% of those summaries that are produced have errors. So, talk a little bit about
that's
that?
exactly to my point. So on it, it still requires the physician expertise and the physician judgment, because to your point, without that, what it does is just scale that ambiguity, create more work, create more rework, create more risk. So to be able to use it really intelligently and as a tool, but still with the clinical experts in that space, I think is where it needs to go, and that's kind of.
So talk a little bit about the data that you're in bringing in and consuming, and what you're doing with it.
So the way that, if you think of kind of the big picture, right? So there are just so many steps along the process, right? There's the patient care. That care then needs to be documented. The documentation needs to be translated into coding, and then from that coded record, from that administrative record, we abstract, the reimbursement and most of those quality metrics, right? But there's different experts at each point along that path. There's different technologies for each point along that path. And so kind of as that gets watered down, as the nuance is lost, that reimbursement, the quality metrics default conservatively. So what we're seeing is and what we do at Accuity actually is to bring all of those experts together and use AI to kind of surface where those gaps are, and to get into kind of the gray areas between all of those different kind of different places of expertise along the path, so that clinical reality is reflected in that final administrative record in the most accurate way possible.
Well, interesting you bring that up, because one of the things, I'll plug my own company for a minute, we do is put a lot of that at the point of care. So a lot of that data cleanup, we give the clinicians that there's inconsistent entries and the coding is not right, and would you like to fix it now while the patient's standing in front of you? Do you think that's the right approach?
I think yes, and right. We want to do that as much as possible, and our clinical colleagues are at capacity, right? And so to do that in a targeted way, not so that we are over documenting, but so that we are documenting precisely and recognizing that, we both know this, right? That's not what we went through training for. And we don't expect them to learn all of this, all of the administrative pieces. So kind of figuring out, to what extent we can have those expectations, and then bringing in tools to really support them, so that gets reconciled, so that they can focus on patient care. I think it's finding that balance.
I tell everybody all the time, I didn't go to medical school to get a code. I went to medical school to treat patients. And
right, well, even documentation, right? We document to communicate with each other. We document so that we remember the details of how the patient looked the day before. We didn't learn to document, for the specificity, so that the quality metrics, accurately reflect that. But that does need to happen, right? They have to go hand in hand, because the financial sustainability of the organization is what ultimately enables patient care to continue.
Absolutely.
So how do we find that balance without burning out our doctors even more?
I was sat on a hospital system board for several years, and it was a Catholic hospital system, so I sat right by the Mother Superior at all of our board meetings, and she said this all the time: no margin, no mission. And she was very attuned to making sure everything, all the I's got dotted, all the T's got crossed in that whole process.
What I'm increasingly seeing in this space is, really even just over the last few years, more and more, is physician leaders on that administrative side and really understanding that space, and likewise the financial leaders having an increased understanding around the clinical aspect of it and the quality metrics and the importance. I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago, and the CFOs were talking about O/E ratios, and so I think we're seeing that those gaps start to be bridged, and that just helps to further align our goals.
Well, most physicians, at least I was one of them, didn't like somebody coming to me after the fact and saying, "Oh, by the way, Dr. Anders, you missed this, would you like to recode that?" So we're trying to fix a lot of that long before it has to get to that point where you're doing all that back and forth rework. So
Yes, absolutely. The way that we approach that piece at Accuity is, yes, we want as much of that to get captured up front, knowing that there still needs to be some reconciliation and some kind of capture at the end. And so we have a huge team actually of physicians who are specially trained in this area, so we can kind of take on that burden and minimize the rework and minimize the burden that the clinical physicians need to do.
So you were at HIMSS last year?
This is my first
This
time.
is your first HIMSS.
Yes.
So what do you think? Give me an impression.
It's almost overwhelming. It's so big.
Yes, it is.
I mean, not almost overwhelming. Yes, it's this is one of the biggest that I've been to for sure.
Yeah.
It's good energy though.
It's a lot of energy.
It's good energy. Yeah.
Yeah, my son is here with his technology company, and he says, "Oh my God, Dad, this is just nuts." That's what I took him out to dinner Sunday, and he's like, "This is crazy.
Yeah.
This is crazy." Thanks a lot for coming by.
Yes, great to meet you.
And we'll have this probably out in a month or so.
Okay.
So you have a chance to see it or hear it.
Okay. Awesome.
Thank you very much. I'm here with Tell Me Where It Hurts podcast at HIMSS26, and I have Sandra Johnson, the Senior Vice President of Client Services at Clinicomp. Sandra, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, in this wonderful milieu of things, what is Clinicomp looking for or thinking is new and exciting?
Well, we're excited just to see how the AI conversation is evolving. I think that's been a topic for many years, and now we're seeing it move from experimentation to operization.
We'll say it again.
We're moving from AI experimentation into operationalization.
You're fine. So, I see that. It's interesting. I see the conversation changing from the AI everywhere all the time for everything to let's determine what we want it to do as opposed to not, which I thought was a great step forward. So, comparing last year to this year, what are the big differences?
I think last year we saw a lot of layered solutions, and I think as time evolves, we're seeing that adds complexity, and so there seems to be a more focus on trying to find unified platforms that can operationalize AI into the clinical workflows.
So do you see a particular part of workflow? Because I come from the old EMR world, been there doing it 20 years. So do you see a certain area more than another when it comes to a physician's workflow?
Yeah, I mean, the main goal is giving time back so that they can spend more time on patient care and patient delivery and having those meaningful interactions. So ways where ambient listening can automate documentation, where AI can be embedded with existing workflows so that there's not retraining or additional steps that need to be added in. So a lot of focus on just how to streamline documentation and automate it so that they can accelerate to, inform clinical decision making.
Well, interesting you bring up ambient listening, because there was a recent study, and I've said this on other episodes, with Harvard and Stanford, that basically said 70% of the summaries created by ambient listening have errors. And I've always gone down the road, well, they have errors because clinicians really haven't looked at what they're doing with it yet, which I think is a problem because of data downstream. So what's Clinicomp thinking about how they get around the fact that there are errors and getting those errors corrected now out the stream of data before it ever leaves?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important that as AI continues to evolve, and there's going to be advancements in the models, and so having the flexibility to make sure that it's reliable and accurate, and having the ability to service up the recommendations, but really having the capability to edit to make sure that we are validating and making sure that the information is correct, and working with the models to make sure it gets more accurate over time when there are errors.
So interestingly, I had that conversation with my primary care physician last time I was there, and it's an Epic shop, and they're using ambient listening. So I asked her, I said, well, I'll let you go ahead and do that as long as you promise me you'll read it and make sure it's okay. because even in my medical record and my spouse's, there was all kinds of errors we had to get rid of, and some were pretty bad. So it's one of those things. I think it's evolving. I think it's going to get better, but it's also imperative because these inaccurate medical records follow people everywhere.
And that's a great example of how, how technology is just a tool, and you can't take the human-centered approach or design out of it. Humans are the key to making sure that the records are accurate, and you can't lose that human touch. So really validating the information that's being served up to you is so critical, and AI is never going to replace individuals and resources because that level of detail is necessary.
So glad to hear you say that, because there's a lot of folks out there, and I've had some spirited discussions about AI replacing clinicians completely. And I actually had this said to me, that an AI clinician only is better than no clinician at all. And I could not believe that came out of a physician's mouth.
That is shocking.
It's very kind of shocking. So what are you guys actually looking for here? Anything in particular?
We're just excited to be here to see how the technology is continuing to evolve. When we're talking to organizations, we hear how, fragmented solutions are slowing them down and really looking for technology that can reduce the friction, reduce the administrative burden. So looking to partner with organizations and see how we can help be a part of the solution to address those growing challenges.
Good. Is there anything else I haven't asked that you think is important?
Well, I think that things that are overlooked are interoperability. There's a lot of systems that are being utilized in the field these days, and unless the data is really unified and connected, then it's not serving up meaningful information. So I think that's another area of focal point and conversation that we're hearing around HIMSS. So excited to dig deeper into that as well.
Yeah, interoperability is absolutely critical, and I find that I'm looking forward to the day where it actually works. So I'm not actually being my own interoperability standard, because I've done that for my family, where I go with people, my elderly parents, I did that for them. I was their medical record. So when the physician didn't know something I thought was critical, I had to tell them. It was all in their records, same organization, but they couldn't find stuff. So it was a very interesting prospect. Sandra, thank you so much for coming by.
Yeah, I appreciate the time.
Welcome to the HIMSS episode of Tell Me Where It Hurts. Today I'm talking to Greg Miller, VP of Business Development and Marketing at Carta Healthcare. Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about what you're looking for here at HIMSS. What do you see different at HIMSS?
Well, the first thing I see different is the energy seems to be back. HIMSS seems to be back, after the last few years where it's been kind of quiet. So that's good. I think just looking around the booths, I'm paying a lot of attention to who's saying what about AI specifically and whether or not they're leading with that or toning it down a little bit. Because I think this is the year where we're moving beyond the shiny object syndrome, and we're actually looking at practical applications of AI. And funny, because I had a thought as I was walking into the exhibit hall. If you remember back in like 99, 2000 at HIMSS, it was during the whole .com thing. It was super cool to have like whatever your company name .com on the back of your collar. And over the last couple of years, it's kind of felt like that. But I'm not seeing that as much anymore. Right? It seems to be toning down. And I think we're just moving into a next phase, which is the practical application of AI to solve real problems.
So you're seeing the shift of, it was AI everywhere all the time last year.
Right.
So you're seeing it more focused.
A little bit, yep.
Would you call it more deterministic as opposed to
it's a good way to describe it. And I think Vibe was a little bit that way too. It was less, here's my shiny object, my cool gadget, my thing. Yeah. It's more about what you use the thing for, or the problem that the thing solves for. So
these LLMs have been in the news lately. The whole thing about Anthropic now as a supply chain detriment and OpenAI, all of that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
What is all this hubbub about?
Well, first I should say maybe a disclaimer in that our platform is built on Anthropic. So we have a very close partnership with Anthropic, and we're part of the whole Claude for Healthcare announcement they made about a month ago or so. So we're very friendly with Anthropic. I think what's happening with them, there's a couple things. One is, I think the CEO is the first CEO who's standing up to the administration and saying this is not right, and this is what we're going to do about it. We're going to vote with our platform. So I think that's a positive step in general. And I know we're not talking about politics, but I think that's what you're seeing is that action. And I think one of the core reasons why we chose Anthropic to build on Anthropic as opposed to OpenAI or Google as foundation models is because of the privacy and security. And when you're dealing with healthcare and healthcare data, right, obviously privacy and security is paramount. And so we're delighted to be partners with Anthropic, and I love that they are, standing up to or standing behind what they stand for.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because internally we're constantly evaluating, new models and all of that for our uses. And I've personally found that Anthropic is now rising to the top of its functionality, reasoning, privacy, security, where all these others, it's like promises. Yeah. And they're not as accurate. Right. Especially in healthcare, they're not as accurate. So it's interesting to see that. So is there anything here that stands out to you when you've been walking around that we haven't talked about?
I don't know yet, because the show just started. Yeah. And I've only made it to your booth. So
thanks for coming.
I haven't really seen anything, but I've talked to a lot of people. And I think there's just sort of this renewed energy. Like, roll back a year, right? And there was a lot of hype, obviously, just about AI, but a lot of stuff. And now I feel like it's palpable to me. There's just a renewed energy for healthcare technology, and I think we're on the precipice of actually making gigantic leaps forward, leveraging technology. I'm leaving the word AI out of it. But leveraging technology to improve patient care.
I've also seen a little more focus on patient care.
Yeah.
Both engagement directly with patients as well as assisting clinicians with what they have to do every day.
Absolutely.
And thank goodness we've come around to that, because it seemed like last year was just the opposite. Right. They were just throwing it against the wall and see whatever stuck. Yeah. And okay, this is good, we're going to make it for you. No, ask the guys that actually have to use it what they need, and let's get that incorporated in it. Greg, thanks for coming.
Jay, thank you.
I appreciate
Pleasure as always.
You're very welcome, and have a great show.
Good luck with the show.
That's all for today. Thanks for listening to Tell Me Where It Hurts. Tune in to Healthcare Now Radio and Podcast Network each month for the latest episode. To learn more about Medicomp systems, visit our website at www.medicomp.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at MedicompSys or myself at MedicompDoc, or check out the show notes for links. See you next time.